Shounen manga often take time to fully realize their identity. Their early arcs might be solid, but they don't always showcase what will later make them truly special. Hunter x Hunter is no different in this regard. Arcs like York New City and Chimera Ant dominate discussions about the series, and for good reason. These are arcs where Togashi's writing shines brightest, where the story becomes deeper, darker, and more complex. Because of this, it's easy to overlook Hunter x Hunter's first arc, the Hunter exams, as just another introductory phase, one that simply lays the groundwork for greater things to come. But I think that's a mistake. The Hunter exams isn't just an obligatory starting point, it's a fantastic arc in its own right. It masterfully introduces us to the world, the characters, and most importantly, the deeper themes that will define Hunter x Hunter moving forward. By the time the exams conclude, it's clear that Hunter x Hunter isn't just another battle shonen, it's something different. In this video, I want to take a closer look at what makes the Hunter exam so compelling, from its structure to its character dynamics, the way it subtly lays the groundwork for the series' future, and how it perfects the art of the first arc. I'll explain why I believe this arc deserves more recognition than it gets. When crafting a narrative, it's imperative that the writer finds some way to get the audience to stick around. Audience engagement is a must, and different stories and storytellers often have their own methods to gaining that as they begin telling them. In Hunter x Hunter, it's established from chapter 1 that our protagonist, Gon, is a young boy who dreams of finding his father, who abandoned him after he was born. A setup like this, quickly establishing a goal which the entire story will be focused on, is an incredibly common reader hook in Shounen Manga. Luffy is trying to become the Pirate King, Naruto is trying to become the Hokage, Edward and Alphonse are looking for the Philosopher's Stone, Asta wants to become Wizard King. This type of setup was once so expected and logical that shonen like Bleach, which didn't immediately lean all the way into this with its protagonist Ichigo, were seen as poorly written to an extent. What a lot of people misunderstood in those days, however, whether they be manga fans or shonen writers, was that while having an overarching goal to define your main character and main story is a good way to gain audience intrigue, that alone is insufficient. This method of introducing your story is more of a Trojan horse tactic, if anything, because it's usually something else that's actually used as the narrative hook. Fullmetal Alchemist is widely argued to have gotten good when the Elric brothers discover the alchemic composition of the Philosopher's Stone, because the composition opens up an enormous can of worms. And by can of worms, I mean an entire government conspiracy, which the rest of the story follows. With Naruto, no doubt in my mind, people were invested in Naruto's main goal of becoming Hokage. The journey to becoming Hokage was never front and center for his character. In fact, the goal was practically pushed to the side for much of part 2 in favor of his new goal of kissing Sasuke. Well, actually, it was bringing him back to the village, but semantics. Shonen manga can't build their whole opening around the protagonist's goal because long-form storytelling needs something more immediate to keep people engaged. A goal like becoming Hokage or finding your dad is too far off to carry the early story on its own. Readers need something happening right now to stay hooked. Why am I yapping about all of this? It's because the Hunter exams very cleverly gains your intrigue with Gon's goal of finding his father, and then keeps you hooked on that goal by tying that into the titular Hunter exams. The first chapter establishes that not only is Gon looking for his father, he plans on taking the titular Hunter exams because if he passes the exams and is granted a Hunter license, it will give him access to information that'll make him finding his father much easier, therefore making it a more clear, tangible first step in his journey to finding his father. So what we have is a goal being set that's meant to supplement the main goal. This is actually really smart. A lot of shonen like Naruto or One Piece introduce a big goal, but don't immediately focus on it. It's more of a background detail while other conflicts take center stage. Hunter x Hunter avoids that by making Gon's personal journey and the Hunter exams one and the same, giving the audience something concrete to latch onto from the start. Now, with quite a lot of early material from shonen manga, there's a clear difference in stylization or maybe storytelling when comparing their beginning to later arcs. Early Bleach is much more episodic, almost slice of life, whereas the rest of its material is much more story-driven, serious, and feels very different. JoJo's first 2 arcs are missing many of the things the series became known for, stands, and are more story-driven compared to later parts that are more character and action-driven. Dragon Ball doesn't develop into the intense high-stakes bloody battle manga it became became famous for quite a while, as it slowly transitioned from comedic episodic adventure manga to kung fu movie parody to action adventure manga with some comedy to just an action manga. Hunter x Hunter isn't too dissimilar, as in its first arc is marginally different from what it becomes later. Hunter x Hunter is probably most well known for its utterly insanely intricate plot lines filled with many different points of views, large swarms of characters with their own motivations, each moving the plot in several different directions. With said plotline filled with incredibly meaningful thematic depth, the likes of which isn't often seen in Shounen Manga. Later arcs like York New City and Chimera Ant exemplify this, being largely narrative driven in their structure. By comparison, however, the Hunter exams is much more character driven, though I perhaps explain the difference, because at face value the difference between character-driven and narrative-driven probably isn't clear. A narrative-driven arc like York New City is more intricate. Instead of simply following characters tackling obstacles, the story is constantly shifting due to multiple moving parts. For example, the Phantom Troop attacks the auction, which forces the Mafia to react by recalling their assets and mobilizing their men, which in turn puts Kurapika into action as he captures one of the troop members, escalating the conflict further. Instead of a linear series of trials, the plot shifts dynamically based on multiple factions pursuing their own objectives. What makes the Hunter exams a character-driven narrative is how simple the structure is. Characters are presented with an exam, and the focus is on how they react, strategize, and get through these challenges. And then much of it is filled with character interactions and banter that doesn't intrinsically move the story forward. Like how during the first test, we spend some time watching Leorio banter with Killua on if he's allowed to skateboard in the exams, given the first test is intended to be a physical exam. Or the characters causing an uproar upon learning that Leorio is hardly out of their teens, something which they have a hard time believing. Hunter x Hunter's main cast is excellent across the board. Of course, I'm referring to the main four introduced at the start of this arc: Gon, Leorio, Kurapika, and Killua. I think when it comes to stories by Yoshihiro Togashi, whether that be Yu Yu Hakusho or Hunter x Hunter, I feel one of his more underrated strong suits is his ability to write believable and engaging characters. His ability to make us care about them just by giving us a feel for their personalities, letting their characters shine in more mundane interactions. Characterization, essentially. I've talked about this quite a bit in other videos, and I've even teased making a video about this subject by itself, because it's something that most people who enjoy stories don't really think about, as most assume getting audiences to care about your characters comes strictly from character development or straddling some sad backstory on them. Now, don't get me wrong, both of these are at play in this first arc with these four, but it's not actually the main focus. Our interactions aren't primarily focused on any of these characters' development or their backstories. They only come out when the story finds it absolutely necessary to touch upon. For example, in the first exam, Kurapika forces Leorio to come clean about his backstory, which is the moment he develops far more nuance as a character, as we discover he isn't truly the money grubber hothead he seemed to be, as his money obsession comes from his childhood poverty, which led to his friend's death. But otherwise, stuff like this doesn't really play that big a role in the narrative until the final couple of exams. The first test is a marathon that tests the mental and physical capabilities of the examinees. It helps flesh out the relationship between Gon, Leorio, and Kurapika, who all befriended each other during the prelim tests, and also introduces us to Killua. Even though Killua is a much colder, somber kind of kid, Gon is able to reach out and find some connection between the two, with each of their interactions slowly showing him breaking out of his shell, with that shell cracking being kind of subtle in fact, instead of being the main focus of every interaction. We also see Kurapika fully warm up to Leorio. We'd seen that the two had a lot of common ground and weren't as negative towards each other as they were upon first meeting each other, but now their friendship is fully committed to, with Kurapika getting Leorio to open up about his childhood and respecting his drive to follow his dreams just like he does. All of this is integral because it helps us connect with these characters, and by connecting with them, well, we want to see them succeed. We want to see them achieve their goals. Think about it like this. We want to see Naruto become Hokage because to him, it'll validate him in a society that threw him out. We want to see Ed and Al get their bodies back because it represents them righting the biggest wrong of their lives, their failure to bring their mother from the dead. It'll also put an end to Al's suffering, as living as a suit of armor kinda sucks. But with Gon, he really isn't going to get anything out of meeting his father. It's not like it's because his home life without him wasn't good. In fact, much of the first chapter is all about how good his relationship with his aunt is. He doesn't even know what to expect from finally meeting him. Gon has literally nothing to gain by searching for his dad, and logic should dictate that because of this, we shouldn't care then, but we do. Audiences are overwhelmingly invested in seeing Gon achieve his goal, clear the Hunter exams, and pass that first benchmark that will further his goals. Gon is just so pure, innocent, and headstrong in his desire to finally find his dad that you can't help but root for the kid. That's what I believe makes us want to see him succeed more than anything, and this tactic of making us care extends to the other characters too. For example, Killua wants to be free from his family's expectations that he live the life of an assassin. He wants to be able to live the life of a normal kid who has friends like Gon. Instead of the story hammering this into our heads all of the time, it chooses to instead focus on his developing camaraderie with Gon, the fun of their interactions, before threatening to rip him out of the story entirely into a life of unhappiness. Similar situation with Kurapika too, whose quest for vengeance is something the story doesn't really focus on much in this arc, instead giving way to his kind-hearted character and strong will to protect his new bonds. Basically, this is the kind of storytelling that's present in the first half of this story arc. Much of it is the characters being faced with one of the tests and having to figure out how to handle it, and much of the chapters and episodes are just them dealing with each other while doing so. Test 2 is a cook-off, with the first half seeing the participants catching giant boars, and the second half seeing the participants try to cook something off of a vague description, and the hilarity that ensues with that kind of situation. Nothing too high stakes, but it presents us with some funny moments of character for everyone involved. Before the third test, Gon and Killua play a game of Get the Ball Out of My Hand with Isaac Netero, the CEO of the Hunter Association. There isn't much of a point to this conflict, and you could make the argument that it could be cut out of the story with little issue, but what I think it does is excellently put a dividing line between Gon and Killua, who up to this point have been developing their friendship. Both of them have different mindsets towards beating Netero. Gon is just here for the challenge, while Killua is in it to win it. We also see that Killua struggles in situations where he is weaker than his opponent, while Gon is more willing to take risks and test himself in these same environments. These little details separate these two in terms of character, and yet, at the same time, I can't help but feel it subtly brings these two closer together. The third test is a 72-hour race in a labyrinthian tower. Gon, Killua, Leorio, and Kurapika are paired together alongside one of two antagonists in this arc, Tonpa. This arc doesn't really focus on antagonists in the traditional sense. Antagonists are intended to be obstacles for the main characters, but in the Hunter exams, the biggest obstacle is always the ever-present fear of failure, and rarely do the antagonists make sure personally to be a factor in that fear. Even in this segment, Tonpa is more of a comedic saboteur than an actual concern. I think only towards this test's conclusion does he really show his hand in that regard, but even then, that's only briefly, as he shows that he's a little more than just a dickhead who likes to make things harder for the rookies. He admits he gets a kick out of seeing people go down when they get so close to achieving their dreams, and he intends to take advantage of this test to form disunity within the group. Much of this test is spent dealing with a set of prisoners who challenge the group to a set of games. The standout ones being Kurapika's match to the death, where he further details his background and that no matter how kind he is, he will find those responsible for the death of his clan and absolutely tear them apart, and yet he simultaneously cannot bring himself to kill his opponent, showcasing the huge contradiction in his personality. On the other hand, we have Killua's death match, where within a matter of moments he rips out the heart of his opponent and crushes it without a second thought, further establishing his ruthlessness. But not too long after this is contrasted by his endearing childishness when the group is forced to wait out the clock before continuing their journey down the labyrinth. These little details and contrast matter because they're a very subtle way of adding layers to the characters without having to spell it out for us. It gets us more interested in seeing what Togashi will do with them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's common for shonen manga to feel noticeably different in their early chapters, as mangaka work to establish their stories and find their footing. Hunter x Hunter is now widely praised for its complex characters, intense fights, emotional depth, and darker themes, but its first arc doesn't immediately radiate that same energy. At least, not at first. The Hunter exams initially presents itself as a more lighthearted, character-driven narrative, but beneath the surface, the foundation for something deeper is already being laid, and it's around the time that Hisoka starts making his presence truly felt that you begin to realize the story is more than it seems. For much of the first exam, the big threat was a psychological one. That threat of the crew exhausting themselves, which, truth be told, aside from the case of Leorio, was truly not a concern in the first place. This segment was more so about bonding everyone together, but when Hisoka decides to personally get involved, deeming himself a temporary proctor for the exams, that's when for the first time, we have a true, tangible threat on our hands. His encounter with Gon, Leorio, and Kurapika cements him as a future concern, as he handily puts away Leorio and Gon and forces Kurapika to flee the scene, but just as quickly as he establishes himself, he exits stage right, letting the trio get away and even leads them to the testing site of test number 2. In a way, he almost beckons the viewer to question if there is more to come, if there will be more conflict between the main squad and this mad clown. And that's what begins our first telltale sign that Hunter x Hunter has some narrative baggage up its sleeve. The moment it's established what the 4th test is going to be, it's made abundantly clear that this is not going to be the fun character romp the prior 3 had been. Whereas before the main 4 were pretty inseparable, Gon is on his own for much of the test, and Killua doesn't make much of an appearance throughout this segment himself. The phase is on a remote island. Every remaining participant in the exams is told they will need to hunt down a participant with a specific numbered badge. Gon gets the unenviable task of getting the badge of Hisoka. It proves to be a mountain even Gon isn't certain he can overcome, as he spends quite a bit of the allotted time for the test just sitting around figuring out how exactly he can pull off a feat like that. After some contemplating the situation, he manages to come up with a decent strategy. He intends to take Hisoka's badge at a moment where Hisoka's attention is elsewhere, presumably in conflict. He begins to spend day and night practicing the swing of his fishing rod, but he slowly starts to lose confidence in himself, only picking himself back up at the memory of his Aunt Mito. It's enough to drive him to keep going and work up the courage to track down Hisoka and stalk him, even in spite of how fearful he may be of him. He spends the entire day tracking Hisoka, watching his movement, getting a good feel for the type of man he is before the opportunity finally presents itself. And with a single swing, he manages to achieve his goal in spite of all the doubt and all the fear. And now all that's left for him to do is to get away. And yet, because of that doubt and because of that fear, he himself becomes the victim of an attack from the one responsible for stealing his badge. Gon came so far, and yet he immediately fumbled his opportunity to pass the exams. But luck would have it, Hisoka was watching the whole thing and makes it a point to retrieve Gon's badge and even give his to Gon for free. I feel like anyone else in this position would be grateful that Hisoka, the mad bastard, was willing to show a little ounce of mercy, but this is when we learn that Gon is very prideful. All that hard work, him spending hours practicing by the lake, fighting back fear just to find the right moment of attack, all that just for a freebie? To Gon, this is just insulting to the work he put in. He vehemently rejects Hisoka's gesture, in spite of being poisoned to a degree where he shouldn't even be able to move. He's so enraged that he gets to his feet, and for his defiance, he's given a nasty punch to the face and forced to mull over this perceived humiliation for the rest of the exams. Now, the last third of this exam sees Gon reuniting with Kurapika and Leorio and assisting them on getting Leorio's badge, and while it appears to be a return to the character-focused antics of the prior phases, underneath all of the jokes and all of the tribulations, we find that Gon is still reeling from his perceived failure, doing this primarily out of a desire to validate himself, prove he is capable to himself, to his friends. And while he is successful in getting his friends out of a very difficult pickle, this just isn't enough for him. For this entire arc, Gon has been the pure ball of energy. Nothing ever seems to faze him. The possibility of failure, the considerable challenges of each phase of the exam, things like Killua being an assassin, that doesn't faze him, and he continues to want to be close with him. Killua murders a guy in cold blood? That's fine. Kurapika doesn't want to kill this guy, which will probably cause him and his friends to fail the exams? That's fine too. Gon is somebody who always sees the light of every situation, always approaches everything with nothing but joy and bounciness. So to see that element of his character completely shatter as he grapples with his weakness, it's not only a terribly heartbreaking moment, it's one that changes the tone of the story and subtly begins moving in a direction away from the search for Gon's dad. Before I say anything else, I want to make it very clear that a scene like this probably would not have been effective without the 3 prior exams focusing mostly on character interactions, as it helped settle in our minds that Gon was the type of person who could never really be fazed by anything, and that he had an innocent, joyful approach to all aspects of life. Because when faced with the opposite, it's surprising. And seeing Gon, of all people, emotionally hurt, it's a huge gut punch. But it also marks a shift for the storytelling of the arc, marking a complete shift away from the character-driven material that came before. Not forever, but for the remainder of this arc. The story becomes much more intricate and focused on character development and growth, not just the characters working together and dealing with situations. This moment also changes the main goal of the narrative. In between all of the fun little character moments Gon was involved in, our focus still remains fixated on his goal of finding his dad, which was to come after he landed his hunter license, but now that goal takes a backseat. Now his main goal is to prove himself, that he is capable. It's something more immediate and tangible, and so as Gon's motivations shift, our desire to see him succeed pushes us to make this the focus of our attention, whether or not Gon can pull himself out of this mental block of his. This leads us into the final phase of the exams. Essentially, it's your traditional 1v1 tournament, pretty common for Shonen. The twist, however, is that it's a reverse bracket tournament, meaning that only one person is due to lose. You only need to win one fight in order to become a hunter. The bracket is also very unconventional. Instead of everyone getting an equal or just about an equal amount of matches, the amount of matchups a participant receives, thus opportunities to actually pass the exams, depends on if the judges think they have the potential to be a hunter in the first place, though it also depends on their skill set and adaptability. Gon actually tops this chart alongside Hanzo, something you would expect to make him pretty happy, but for him, it's something he doesn't even really notice. His attention remains on his Hisoka. He doesn't care about where he stands in the rankings or who he's about to fight. The only thing that matters to him is proving that he isn't weak, and thus begins the first round of the final phase. Gon goes up against Hanzo, and while everyone recognizes the clear difference in power, Gon included, he suspects that he can get around this by outrunning him, but this assumption quickly proves to be incorrect, because Gon is in fact not faster than Hanzo. The match swiftly grinds to a halt as Hanzo makes it abundantly clear to Gon that victory is simply out of the question for him. Hanzo was a ninja trained from a young age. He's faster, stronger, much more well equipped for this matchup. He reminds Gon that even if he gives up now, he has plenty of opportunities to pass, but Gon refuses. Hanzo busts Gon's nose, crushes one of his ears, damages his eyesight, and yet Gon refuses to give up. Hanzo starts beating Gon. He beats him for hours and hours, and yet Gon refuses to give up. Mind you, Gon is pretty much guaranteed to pass the exams. There are many people in the tournament that he probably cannot beat, but there are just as many, if not more, that he can. But every part of his body that Hanzo ticks off the anatomy chart diminishes his chances of actually passing the exams, the thing he's been dreaming of since childhood, the thing that'll bring him closer to his father that he so desperately wanted to meet at the start of our narrative, and yet he refuses to back down. And several hours and a broken arm in, Hanzo becomes frustrated and starts pressing Gon as to why. Why not use his fishing rod to help himself? Why does he not give up? Continue fighting in the next round and get his license that way? Why undergo this fruitless beating? It's because Gon has changed. He's no longer satisfied with just the idea of possibly meeting his father. It's clear he can't help but lament his weakness, and desires to win to prove to himself that he's not as weak as he thinks he is. It's why he chooses to not use his fishing rod. He doesn't think his victory will mean anything if he uses the help of something that belonged to somebody else, as that rod belonged to his dad. This moment is insanely pivotal for the plot of Hunter x Hunter. Much of Hunter x Hunter is not about finding Gon's dad. In fact, for the next two arcs, that isn't even mentioned any, if at all. The arcs after that are focused primarily elsewhere, such as on Kurapika's run with the Phantom Troop and Gon and Killua's adventures on Greed Island. Hunter x Hunter subtly pushes Gon's goal of finding his dad to the background, instead shoving in our face a new goal. A goal that, while unspoken, becomes the true driving force behind Gon's actions moving forward, the need to prove himself. Not to others, not even to his father, but to himself. This is why the series, despite being framed around Gon's search for his father, rarely ever treats it as the main focus. Gon's own feelings of weakness become a persistent mental block for him, something he'll have to grapple with for the rest of his time as the protagonist of Hunter x Hunter. And it's something that throws Gon into incredibly fascinating scenarios as a character. Gon is so simple at times, but Togashi puts him in these scenarios where we see a little more underneath the surface. When he fights the bomber and nearly jeopardizes the plan set in place to beat him just to prove to himself he could hold his own. When he learned Kite, the man who told him about his father still being out there, was killed. To get to my point, Hunter x Hunter manages to swerve its focus to a new goal right underneath the noses of its viewers, and it does this by telling an honestly compelling story about self-expectations and strength. Even as Gon passes, simply because Hanzo realized he was getting nowhere torturing a kid who clearly was never going to give up, Gon still doesn't accept the victory, seeing it as inconclusive and not proving anything. He's still weak. For a character who for much of the arc was portrayed as nothing but a bright bundle of energy, this change in approach for the character narratively is striking and honestly surprising the first go around. But that's not all. It turns out the one person who didn't pass the exams ended up being Killua. Throughout the arc, Killua has been something of an enigma. On one hand, he's cold, distant, and straightforward, often appearing detached and unbothered. He's got a clear dark streak, a remnant of his upbringing as an assassin, with the capacity for violence lurking beneath the surface, yet at the same time, most of his screen time shows him as fun-loving, adventurous, a kid, just as playful and curious as Gon. He's less optimistic and more serious, but underneath it all, he genuinely seems like a good person who wants nothing more than to break free from the brutal expectations his family has placed on him. So when Illumi, his older brother, shows up and starts gaslighting him, claiming that Killua doesn't truly understand his feelings for Gon, that at his core Killua is nothing but a killer, it raises questions. Despite Illumi's manipulations, Killua's actions and emotions throughout the arc still paint a different picture. He's shown to care deeply for Gon, to be genuinely moved by their friendship. His hesitance to leave Gon's side speaks volumes about the bond they share, making the eventual moment when Killua is sent back home all the more painful. His refusal to fully accept his family's expectations clashes with his feelings for Gon, which are honest and real. This is why Killua's arc hits so hard, because despite knowing the darkness that lingers in his past, we as the audience see him as a kid who just wants to live on his own terms. It's that internal conflict that makes us empathize with Killua. We want to see him escape that shadow to grow and make his own choices, to stay by Gon's side. Whatever the case may be, from then on our main narrative goal is bring him back. And no thanks to the work Togashi put in the first half of the Hunter exams, we're super invested in this narrative because of that. The conclusion of the Hunter exam arc leaves me with a sort of last day of school vibes. Gon finally got what he wanted, but there's this mixed feeling of, this is all I wanted, I don't know where to go now, and there's still work to do in the future. It perfectly sets up for the next arc, which will be all about getting Killua back, and it also sets up the arc after that, which will be about Gon and Killua getting stronger so Gon can run that setback with Hisoka. Lesser shonen often struggle with figuring out how to set up further story arcs. Hunter x Hunter makes that look easy. But it's with that note that the Hunter exams conclude. Retrospectively, this arc is often looked down upon by the Hunter x Hunter community and is seen as a standard stepping stone styled arc, but I don't think that attitude tells the full story. The Hunter exams is certainly a very different arc from the many more critically acclaimed storylines Hunter x Hunter would become known for. Its more character-focused, hands-off narrative for the first half is maybe a little unconventional and unfamiliar to many, as not many shonens are willing to lean in this direction, and if they do, they usually don't do it all too well anyways. I do understand why this arc isn't looked back on as fondly as its peers in the series, especially given most Hunter x Hunter fans first experienced it with the 2011 anime, and not the manga or 1999 adaptation. 2011's take on the Hunter exams is fine, but Togashi's initial vision as presented by the manga is super charming, and the 1999 anime also maintains the layer of darkness that came with the manga storyline by framing this arc in ways that accentuate that feeling of being a kid exploring a world that you don't quite understand, both the good and bad of that. This arc manages to be a fun setup that gives us fun characters to watch bounce off of each other all sitcom style, then uses that setup to question our understanding of these characters and the world they inhabit, telling such a fascinating narrative with them. It's for these reasons, from the moment the Hunter exams got into gear, I was a fan of this story, and it's for all these reasons I think Hunter x Hunter has the strongest first arc in all of shonen. Don't get me wrong, it has its competitors for that title, but for me, this arc stands out because of how effortlessly it blends adventure, character exploration, and thematic depth into something that feels both classic and unconventional. It's not just a stepping stone, it's a statement that Hunter x Hunter is far more than meets the eye.